We are gathered here today to do honor to the life and memory of Alan Deale. Death has come to our friend, as it comes eventually to all. Those opening words, like much of what you'll hear today, were words that Alan used himself at the beginning of these services. For we gather today to remember a husband, a friend, a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather, a citizen, a lover of life, all that, yes, and a minister, a Unitarian minister, a man who, over his long career, conducted hundreds of memorial services, as we do. Those of us who wear these mantles, who take on this role, we do this over and over again. I'm the Reverend Dr. Matthew Johnson, senior minister of this church. I am honored beyond measure to assist today in the performance of this ritual of memory. In our tradition, these services of memory are about the person who has died, remembering them, honoring them. And in the back of every minister's mind, every time is a little thought, someday this shall come for me. Someday for me. And so we assemble a file, notes, things we want said, maybe some things we don't want said. What we think about this, life and death and all that is and was and will be our place in things, and what might be said when we come to dwell in the house of the Lord. We know it will come. We know because we stand on the shoulders of saints, and eventually, if we are wise and lucky at once, others come to stand on our shoulders too. We know that we are not the first to toil in the fields of the sacred, and we give thanks that we will not be the last. Alan learned ministry from a generation of men that strode the earth like kings. I noticed in the narthex a program from his own ordination in 1953, the sermon preached by Frederick May Elliott, one of those men who strode the earth like kings in our ministry. He inherited a treasure from them, but he did not hoard it. He passed it along. He mentored, he encouraged, he taught. One of my dear colleagues said of Alan a few weeks ago when she heard the news, she said, Alan was the last of the giants. And that may be true. And yet I know that when her time comes, someone will say of her, she was the last of the giants. We take up the mantle of ministry. Yes, but also the mantle of life itself. We take it up, we live it, we shape it and love it, and in glory struggle with it, and we hand it on to those who come and dream our dreams and seal them true and dream their own dreams so that what was theirs becomes ours to do. I share the leadership of this service with the Reverend Dr. Harlan Wimpert, who served as one of Alan's interns. I bring you greetings from the Reverend Jordan Nelson Long, who serves as the minister of the Unitarian Memorial Church in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, a Gothic cathedral by the sea where Alan served before he came here. I am Jordan's mentor in ministry, and she and I are honored to share Alan as our common predecessor. I bring you greetings from the Reverend David Weisbard, who served this church from 1979 to 2006. Dave wrote me this week to praise Alan as a colleague so generous in his collegiality and to thank him for this building, which he encouraged, to put it mildly. In particular, Dave also remembered Alan's support for the addition to this building, built in 2000, his vision, his belief in the possible, and his generosity, which made it possible. I bring you greetings from the dozens of ministers who wrote me with gratitude, who remembered him as the preacher of their childhood in Portland, Oregon, who encouraged them into ministry, who blessed them there or here or elsewhere, or in his service to the National Association he served for many years on the committee that certified ministers, who gave our colleagues hard-won wisdom when they needed it and sometimes when they didn't want it, who told the truth. I bring you greetings, too, from my own mother. As a Unitarian young adult in the early 1970s in the Pacific Northwest, she heard Alan preach at young adult conferences and around the district. She got to know him a little bit and admired him. And so when I came here in 2008, my mom read the church history online, and she told me, "I knew Alan. You would really like him." And I did. I did. I have been blessed over the years by his gracious collegiality. We only met in person once when he came here for the 50th anniversary of this building and the 175th anniversary of this church a little more than a year ago. But he would write me letters, and I'd write back. He'd send articles, clippings from newspapers and journals, and notes of encouragement. He would email about the church in Rockford, and we'd correspond. He loved this place. When he came here for the anniversary as our guest of honor, he stood in this pulpit and said, remember, this building is a tool, just a tool for the mission, to honor the sacred, to strengthen the soul, to learn to live worthy of the glory of life and all that is divine. It is a home for the work of the faithful life, but it is the work that matters and not the walls, he said. But he did love the walls. This place is a home for the Spirit, a place where we gather every week to consider the eternal questions. What is true and good? What is holy? How shall we live? It is a place we gather to honor new life, to celebrate love, and to remember the saints from whom their labors rest. In this place, which Alan built with his vision, his wisdom, his time, and his heart, we gather to honor his life, to remember him, to celebrate what he did, to comfort those who loved him most, and to reflect ourselves on this life and death and all that is and was and will be, our place in things, and what might be said when we come to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We light a chalice at the beginning of our services of worship, and 3 of Alan's children, Cindy, Pat, and Dan, will light our flame, and after they do so, I'll read words which Alan wrote for a chalice lighting. The light of this chalice is a frail thing, can be snuffed out by the winds of cynicism or apathy. May its little flame be a reminder of the power of the Spirit. Let us rededicate ourselves to providing light that lifts our hearts and increases the world's joy. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit. We're going to sing together For All the Saints. The words are in your program. The tune is number 103 in your gray hymnal, if you'd like to see that, but we'll sing the words that are here from the Unitarian hymnal that Alan would have begun his ministry with. Let us sing together. be seated. I have, over the years, since he sent me boxes of files from his ministry here, read through Alan's materials, a few at a time. It is said of us ministers that we really only have one sermon, which we preach over and over again in a slightly different way each time. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I do know that we have common themes. And one of Alan's common themes was this matter of the generations, how we come and how we go. In a sermon he preached on Memorial Day 1970, entitled, "Let Us Now Praise Famous Men," that well-known title, he took as text a passage from Ecclesiastes and wrote about those who challenged authority, who were brave, who stood for love and for peace. There's a long section about Dietrich Bonhoeffer in that sermon. And he wrote, and these are from his handwritten notes in his large script, which are in my office. He wrote, "We are here today because of those who went before." Whatever institution you select, it is true. This is about the presence of the generations. We are all where we are now precisely because of this legacy. The reaction to this fact, he wrote, to where we are now is very simply like that of the writer of Ecclesiastes who referred to merciful men whose righteousness hath not been forgotten. The righteousness of Alan Deale and his mercifulness shall not be forgotten. His grace, sometimes hidden by his clever wit, still shone through. His vision is become our legacy. At the death of one of these great men, these long-lived heroes of the past age, what are we to say? Of course, we are sad that he is gone. Those who loved him most, his beloved wife Kathleen, his children, and his family, you shall grieve his loss. Even though he did great things and lived long, you shall still miss him. And that is honor, and that is love manifest, and it is as it should be. So we offer to you who miss him most our love and our sympathy and our honor. Death reminds us that life is precious, that it does not last forever, and that as we come from mystery, we return to mystery, that as we come from dust, we return to dust. And so to make of our day's purpose and meaning, to savor what is beautiful, to mourn what is sorrow, to work for justice and freedom and peace, to make art, to care for those who are precious to you, for our days are not forever. As Alan himself wrote for the Common Book of Worship of the Meadville Unitarian Church, death brings home to us the common concerns, the shared crises, and the universal destiny of all who live upon the earth, our age-long dwelling place amid the vast, unending skies. Death draws us together in the deep-felt emotions of the heart. It dramatically accents the ultimate equality of all involved in our final fate. It reminds us of the essential humanity of all persons that lies beneath all the bitter dissensions and divisions registered in history and in the news of the day. The human race, with its infinite roots reaching back over the boundless past and its infinite ramifications extending throughout the present world and ever pushing forward into the future, remind us that all of us are one great family on the earth. The living and the dead and the generations yet unborn make up this enduring communion of humanity which share the adventures of life. Everyone who comes into this world must leave it, he wrote. Each of us arrives helpless and dependent upon the love of dear ones and we leave, having loved, created, fathered, and mothered, and done our part to enrich and renew life upon our earth. May that be so for us, that we leave, having done our part to enrich and renew life upon the earth, that we run in the relay race, take up our turn, and pass it along when our turn is over. This is about grace in the end, having a sense of place, knowing who you are, being who you are. A child of God, a member of the human family, a creature of the earth. Alan had gifts. He used them for the world. What are your gifts? How will you bless the world? Who will pick up the baton, and what shall we do with our days? What shall we be grateful for? When we learn to live with a sense of grace, with gratitude for the gift of life itself, then death is a peace. In the end, a sunset on a day of wonder. Alan often read for these services a poem by Robert Frost, which I too often use. It speaks to grace, to return to this mysterious love which holds us, a return to the house of the Lord. The poet writes, "When the spent sun throws up its rays on cloud and goes down burning into the gulf below, no voice in nature is heard to cry aloud at what has happened. Birds at least must know it is the change to darkness in the sky. Murmuring something quiet in her breast, one bird begins to close a faded eye, or overtaken too far from his nest, hurrying low above the grove, some waif swoops just in time to his remembered tree. At most he thinks or twitters softly, 'Safe. Now let the night be dark for all of me. Let the night be too dark for me to see into the future. Let will be, be. Let what will be, be.'" Alan trusted in a holy power whose love was larger and more than we can imagine or name. Reading through his own words and the words he used, hearing about his life when he retired from ministry, spending time with him when he was here, and talking about this place and what we do here, I take away this conclusion about Alan's own thought, that the purpose of life is to grow in understanding and wisdom and courage and in peace. Liberal religion, his faith, does not offer answers. It cannot tell you what happens when you die or the exact shape and hue of the divine. It cannot tell you what books to read or what prophets to follow. Instead, it invites you to stir up your own soul, to follow your conscience, to devote yourself to a higher good, to serve the world, and to learn, to grow, to become. Alan loved the church. He loved church buildings and church people and church practice, the tradition and the glory of prayer, the chance to speak our aspirations, our longings, our gratitudes. The rituals, not because they meant something in particular, but because they expressed the human hunger for meaning itself. The preaching, the singing, and in a way that only a preacher can understand, the music. When the choir leads for a moment and takes over, when the voices rise, when the harmony happens, all of it. All of it. When the human voice and human hands and human heart and human mind reaches for the transcendent in worship, in beauty, in justice, in love, we have moments when we go beyond ourselves, when we connect with something more, when we join creation's living song. We become and connect with the eternal. This was the work of his life and what he hands on to us. With wisdom, with courage, with vision, to be called on, to dream of good that yet shall be. we are sad that he is gone. And filled with gratitude that he strode the earth, we take up the work that is for us and hold in our hearts and in our memory, in our sacred places, his memory and his spirit, trusting in ever-growing God, which holds open to us all the door of the house of the Lord.
For the blessings we have known. That was lovely. Thank you. When I was a kid, maybe 10, 12 years old, I was in a conversation with my mom, and we were discussing whether it was harder to lose a young person or an old person. And I remember in my youthful ignorance, I said, well, certainly it's harder when a young person dies because they've got their whole life ahead of them. And my mother said, but remember, when an older person dies, we've had them that much longer to love. She was a wise woman. I'm aware that in addition to those of us in this room who love Alan, there are people who are watching this service or will be watching this service online, the miracle of modern technology. And many of those people watching online are elderly and can't be here because of that. It's difficult to travel. And some of them that are watching because they're ministers and they have sermons to preach tomorrow. And Alan would like that. Alan would want them to carry on. That's what he would do. I'm guessing everyone has had a chance to read the obituary in the back page of the order of service. These painfully short summaries of key facts of a person's life point to, but don't really capture the essence of a person. So allow me to share some of what I know about Alan, having met him in 1976, interned with him in 1977, maintained a relationship over these 41 years, and having spoken to friends and families and colleagues in recent weeks. When you think about Alan, the first thing that might come to any one of our minds is that he was an institutionalist, a man who loved congregations and a man devoted to religion of all colors and stripes. One could argue that Alan was destined from the start to become a minister, born to a Methodist minister dad and a musician mom who later became a congregational minister. Alan was introduced to the world of religion and congregations and the important role that they play in society early on. He would accompany his parents to church on Sunday mornings, and he told me that from the very, very beginning, he had this affection for congregations. When Alan's dad entered World War II as a chaplain serving, among other places, in Normandy, his mother, already an accomplished musician, became a congregational minister. With his dad gone, and in spite of not having a driver's license, Alan would drive his mom to church on Sunday mornings and take her to a million evening church meetings. It's likely that the countless trips to churches and then hanging around churches was the genesis for his love of congregations. And perhaps driving a car underage without a license as a teenager was also the genesis of his love for automobiles, boats, planes, and virtually anything that could fly, including dirigibles. And did you know that he once owned a Ferrari? Alan owned a Ferrari on a minister's salary. Put almost any 13-year-old boy in a car, and they will likely fall in love. A love for the institution of the church led Alan to serve 4 congregations for a combined 40 years. During those 40 years, Alan performed all the usual duties of a minister: pastor, preacher, prophet, promoter, the 4 Ps that some talk about, with exceptional skill and a high degree of integrity. Look on Facebook or on the message boards of online obituaries, and you'll see many tributes from friends, colleagues, and parishioners. One of many tributes came from Sue Harvey, a congregant in Portland, Oregon, where he served. I want to read to you what she wrote. Alan was such a wonderful person and minister. He married me, married my sister, baptized my 2 children, came from New Hampshire to counsel my very ill husband, and flew back again a month later to conduct the memorial service. his curiosity, his humor, his kindness, and his wonderful outlook on life embodied all that is the best about Unitarianism. He will be greatly missed and always remembered. In each of Alan's ministries, he sought ways to expand the impact of his ministry beyond the duties of a parish minister. That's what an institutionalist does. Look for ways to create something that is enduring, something that lives beyond the life of the individual and that benefits the larger culture. Here in Rockford, as many of you know, though many may not, under Alan's leadership and along with forward-thinking lay leaders and staff, the congregation imagined how to create something enduring to add to its already rich history. Those of us fortunate to be physically present in the sanctuary today know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm looking around at this beautiful sanctuary. We are sitting in the sanctuary of a building that Alan helped make happen. Alan personally persuaded a world-renowned architect, Pietro Bellucci, then dean of the School of Architecture at MIT, to create and build this beautiful building. All of you who were members or friends of this congregation those years should take credit for having provided this membership and this larger community with this beautiful vessel for the ministry that's been taking place now for 175 years. I know that in October of 2016, Alan and many members of his family were here to celebrate the 50th anniversary of this building, which symbolizes the power of liberal religion in the city of Rockford. I know this because I know that he loved this church, because I interned with Alan at the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon in 1977, 11 years after the church building was built, and he talked about it incessantly. I mean, really, incessantly. He referred to it, I remember thinking it was strange, he referred to it as a church plant. He talked about the plant. And I said, why do you call it a plant? And he said, well, a plant is the building, the church is the people. And he was proud of the plant. But as Matthew pointed out, this was a vessel, or what was the word you used? A what? A tool for the ministry that this congregation provides. And while serving at the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, Alan's other long-term ministry, Alan saw another way to expand that ministry as well. He could look ahead and see what Portland would be in 20 or 50 or even 100 years. Now understand, in 1977, I was an unmarried 26-year-old intern, and my idea of long-range planning was deciding on Monday evening who I might ask out on Friday. But Alan was a long-term strategic thinker. When he arrived in 1970 in Portland, the Portland church occupied about 1/4 of a city block. The remaining portions were occupied by a Seventh-day Adventist church, a laundry, a walk-in counseling center, a parking lot, and other miscellaneous endeavors. Alan knew that owning an entire city block in the city of Portland was a way to show that liberal religion would continue to be a formidable force in Portland forever. At the time, 1970, Portland was relatively small, but it was growing fast. So what did he do? Each and every time some small parcel of land on the city block on which the Portland church sat came up for sale, Alan would persuade the church leaders and the members of the congregation to purchase that parcel. Each purchase was a challenge requiring the congregation to dig deep into their pockets and to bet on the future. To the credit of the congregation, and under his leadership, they did so again and again and again. Some, as you can imagine, argued we can't afford it. But the power of Alan's persuasiveness was enormous. And today, you may know, the Portland Unitarian Church occupies the entire city block of Portland and then some. Alan's vision and his commitment is a big reason for that. In another way that Alan was an institutionalist was evidenced in his active involvement in district and denominational leadership. I suspect some of you in the sanctuary, and I'm guessing others who are watching online, know Alan from the various responsibilities he's had that way. While serving here in Rockford, he served on the Board of Trustees of the Western District of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Later, he served on the board of the Pacific Northwest District. He served on the national board of the UUA, and very significantly, served as a member and then chair of the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. The Ministerial Fellowship Committee, the MFC, was and is the credentialing body of the association. In each one of these roles, Alan was a force. He would add enthusiasm, discipline, humor, and a deep understanding of theology to everything that he did. The Reverend David Pohl, a longtime parish minister, shared how, and settlement director and on the MFC, settlement director for the UUA for many years, pointed out that Alan successfully pushed for and got a strategically important rule change passed. That's a big deal to get a rule change with the MFC. That would require that those preparing for ministry have a substantial, full-time internship at a healthy, high-functioning congregation. The Portland Church, of course, was exactly that. And so Alan illustrated his commitment to institutionalism by mentoring over a period of 20 years 16 intern ministers. I was one of those 16 ministers that benefited from Alan's wisdom and experience. He essentially launched 16 ministries, each of which reflected in some way a bit of who Alan was. Alan's interns, about 8 years ago, were invited to share remembrances of their days with Alan in honor of Alan's 83rd birthday. And I want to read you just a few clips from those letters that were shared. From David Herndon, currently serving as senior minister of the First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. Alan was tough, and he understood that toughness was not only essential survival skill in ministry, but also a tremendously important gift that ministers can offer to their congregations. For toughness is the gateway to reliability in the short term and stability in the long term. David went on, "Not a day goes by when I do not rely on the attitude and skills that I learned from Alan Deale during that amazing, wonderful, life-changing 12 months that I spent as his intern. I am deeply imprinted, deeply blessed, and deeply grateful." The Reverend Bruce Clear, a retired minister whose last parish was All Souls Unitarian Church in Indianapolis, wrote this: "Alan was so supportive to those of us preparing for ministry. I recall the first time preaching in the first church pulpit. I was thoroughly nervous. He leaned over to me and he said, 'Remember, Bruce, everyone out there is on your side. They are with you and they want you to succeed.' And I can personally remember those exact same words." Jane Malden, now a chaplain in New Orleans, said, "Alan taught me to learn who I can respect and trust in the congregation and to listen to them carefully. He would say, 'Pay attention when they tell you things about your ministry, especially if they are things that you may not want to hear.'" That's really important. And from Deborah Roth-Mero, now a community minister in New York, she writes, "Alan was a true mentor to me. I treasured the conversations we had in what he referred to as his secret office, his very extensive library in the basement of the church. Alan wanted me to experience everything, so he threw at me all kinds of situations and made sure I had ample opportunities to preach, teach, learn, attend workshops, and experience Oregon in all of its glory. Among the countless things I learned was this: be involved with the local clergy and local organizations. Stand up for justice. Public service is an important part of ministry. Alan taught me to work behind the scenes and, like him, to avoid the need to take credit. Think of all the things that Alan did behind the scenes without the need to take credit. Besides being an institutionalist, what else can we say about Alan? Well, he was curious, he was inquisitive, he was a perpetual student, he was a lifelong learner long before the term lifelong learner became popular. He had a terrific formal education, of course, the University of New Hampshire undergrad, Bachelor of Sacred Theology and Masters of Sacred Theology from Harvard, a year at Oxford as the first Unitarian to receive a Merrill Award. But beyond that, he was one of the best-read ministers in our association, and he had a phenomenal memory, so I think he could remember the title and the authors of every book he had ever read. He was enormously respected by his colleagues and envied by his colleagues. He would oftentimes share books from his library, maybe just to make space for more, I don't know. But I wonder how many of us in the sanctuary or watching online received a book from Alan at some point in time with the note inside that said, thought you might enjoy this, and signed it. How did he sign it? Cheers, Alan, right? He always signed his notes, cheers, Alan. Another thing, Alan was committed to social justice and saw it as a crucial portion of prophetic ministry. He was socially active in all of his ministries. He was near the podium during Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. He marched in Selma, Alabama, and spoke to the crowd about the prior week's murder of Unitarian minister James Reeb. He was serving this congregation at the time, and there was an article in the paper that Kathleen shared with me about that visit. He was instrumental in the passage of Oregon's Death with Dignity law. He was on the board of the Memorial Society and active in the American Indian movement. He was engaged in the war on poverty and committed to a woman's right to choose during all of his ministries. Women entering ministry in the 70s, and it was relatively uncommon then. It was the beginning of a tremendous wave that was coming. Women entering ministry in the 70s saw Alan as a supporter and a friend. The Reverend Maureen Killeran shared a story on Facebook that illustrated, as she called it, quote, Alan's creative use of power to support a very junior, very shaky colleague whom he barely knew. She said that the story lives with love and energy in her heart, even today. And of course, Alan had a wonderful sense of humor, which I'm sure we all saw. Don't we all know the glint in his eye? That glint that suggested that he was a kid that just pulled a fast one on his parents. I mean, I remember it well. There's a wonderful story that was shared by the Reverend Brent Smith in an email to Kathleen just last week that I enjoy, and I'm going to share it with you. He said, Brent Smith said, after returning from an internship and graduating from seminary, I was in search for what would become my first settlement in a Unitarian church in Wisconsin. We had set up a pre-candidating service at the Rockford church. I led worship in the small library where the church held summer services, and close to the beginning of the service, I saw Alan walk in and sit down in the very back of the room. Of course, when he saw a group of 7 gathered around the service after the service talking to me, he knew exactly what was going on. Afterwards, the search committee and I went to lunch. We were sitting at a large round table, and I was facing the entrance of the restaurant, and who walked in but Alan? He proceeded to walk towards us with his voice bellowing throughout the large room, "Preacher, preacher, what a fabulous sermon this morning." He walked up to me, shook my hand vigorously, and with a big smile, told me how the sermon had changed his life. Brent writes, "It was so funny, I am still laughing as I write this now." Alan introduced himself around the table. Several of them knew him from his national reputation, and then with sincerity broke the "you've changed my life, preacher" bit and gave me a great endorsement right on the spot. Brent writes, "I will always be grateful to Alan." Doesn't that sound like something Alan would do? "You've changed my life, preacher." Last but certainly not least, Alan had the ability to create and love a large family. While an only child, Alan found himself at the center. While an only child growing up, kind of ironic, he found himself at the center of a very large family in the last decades of his life. Along with his biological children, Cynthia, Pat, and Dan, those he loved included Laura Payne, daughter of his late wife Leola, Deirdre McKay and Charles Corlett, children of Kathleen. It also included their spouses and 9 grandchildren, many of whom are here today. He was loved by all the children and all the grandchildren, and he was willing to take them out on his boat, take them out water skiing whenever they wanted to go. He followed their education with interest, as you would expect, right? Someone who honored education as much as he did. And of course, he would send them books. Dan spoke lovingly of how helpful Alan was when Dad's wife died. Kathleen and Alan would send flowers every month during her illness. Dan shared that, quote, "Hearing his voice was always reassuring. I always felt better after talking with him." He pointed out or reminded us that Alan was a realist, ever practical. He said he would challenge me to think about, so what am I going to do now? There were deep love in those conversations. Cynthia posted on Facebook the day after Alan died. Perhaps you saw it. "My father was charming, bright, accomplished, caring, and wonderful to listen to and talk with because he read a lot and was interested in many things. He had a zest for life and a feistiness that I know I inherited. They have both served, for the most part, served me well." I wonder what the most part. Maybe later we'll hear some stories about how Alan's feistiness affected you. She goes on to say, "I thank him for the positive impact he had on my life, my children's lives, my brother's lives, and on the lives of many people he touched during his 90 years with us on earth." Son Pat said, "Dad was highly educated, but he was not at all snooty about it. He taught us all to work hard. The whole family had a strong work ethic. He taught us to be kind to people, to show interest, to be generous, be respectful. He conveyed that respect for people by finding something in everyone with whom he spoke that they had in common. Having been raised on a farm, and I didn't know that until 2 weeks ago, having been raised on a farm, Alan was comfortable with farm equipment and farm matters, and it gave him yet another topic with which to connect with people." Laura, Leola's daughter, with whom Alan affectionately called the Beast, she loved that. You should know that. She loved that because she pointed out that Alan had a nickname for almost everyone. I was racking my brain to what was mine. I shudder to think. But Alan got her interested in maps because Alan was interested in maps his whole life, and that actually now is her core part of her career. Laura also credits Alan with getting her more involved in social justice issues and learning the critical importance of being honest with oneself. Charles, Kathleen's son, would point out that Alan was both kind and candid. That's a quote. Both kind and candid, an interesting combination. and spoke of how Alan could talk to virtually anyone he met. He could do so partly because he was relentlessly curious. He genuinely liked people, and he knew a little bit about everything and a lot about some things, and if he didn't, he would by the end of the conversation, because he would riddle you with a million questions. Deirdre, Kathleen's daughter, pointed out that Alan's time in the military as a corpsman, essentially a medic, gave him the skills needed to enable two of his wives who died of cancer, Leola and Marguerite, to die at home. He was capable, skillful enough to take care of their needs right up to the end. Deirdre pointing out how Alan had expanded his family to include all of the children and grandchildren, made the powerful comment that he didn't have to love us, but he did. In closing, may I share my first interaction on the day that I met Alan. It was in 1976. I mentioned earlier that Alan had served on the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, the credentialing body of the UUA. They would conduct interviews of those aspiring to be ministers, and they would ask, of course, tough theological questions. It happened that he was the chairperson that year that I met with the MFC, and I still recall Alan asking me, there was no chit-chat at the beginning. When you meet with these folks, they just get right into it. He began by saying, "Harlan, what is your definition of grace?" And I responded with some long, convoluted answer, striving to convince the members of the committee that I had read at least one or two books while in Berkeley, and hoping to be coherent enough to get approval to enter ministerial fellowship. Today, I have a definition of grace that is much more succinct and arguably more accurate. Grace is an unearned, undeserved blessing. That is what Alan was to so many of us, an unearned, undeserved blessing. May we give thanks for all that he taught us, all that he gave us, all that he leaves behind. And may we take some part of Alan and carry it with us forward. It would be the best way in the world to honor him. May I ask that you join me in singing one of Alan's very favorite hymns, entitled "For the Beauty of the Earth." Please rise.
may be seated. I invite you to join me in the spirit of prayer. These words from Alan's dear friend and colleague Paul Carnes from his book, Longing of the Heart. O eternal source of all being, in whom our individual selves do find their beginning and ending, we give thanks for the life of our friend, for the works of his hands, for the thoughts of his mind, for the aspirations of his heart, and finally, when his body could no longer sustain his person, we are thankful for his quiet death. Let his name be inscribed on the tree of life. May our moments of memory bring to us not only an awareness of the nobility of his life, but also the self-knowledge that we too belong to the passing tide. Help us, therefore, in the light of his life, to seek life while it may be found, not tarnishing our brief moments with malice, bitterness, covetousness, or wrongdoing, but setting our spirits on higher purpose. May we see this purpose plain and build on it, that the best within us may come to rule our lives until we live as we truly want to live, and our deeds are the answers to our prayers. Amen. We extinguish this chalice, the flame which has burned while we have been together. It goes out. Things end. It is fragile, as he reminded us, and yet we recall it. Its warmth, part of our life, its light to guide our own way as we go from here into the world that we share together. So may memory be a blessing to us. Words of benediction from the Reverend Dr. Thomas Kerr, minister of this church from 1870 until 1900. May the spirit of truth, of peace, of the beautiful, of love divine, and the deathless life abide upon you from generation to generation. Amen.